right, thank you all so much for joining us today for this virtual roundtable on climate and energy in New Hampshire and the United States. My name is William Riker, and I am the president of the Dartmouth Political Union. I would like to thank my executive board members, Vlado Vojdanovsky, Mac Reeferson, Selena Noor, Sudarshan Balasubramani, as well as Darshana Griggs and Catherine Dara, who have worked tirelessly to make this event happen. For those of you who may not know, the Dartmouth Political Union is a nonpartisan student-run organization dedicated to providing a forum for respectful political discourse on Dartmouth's campus. We offer a platform for officials, academics, politicians, and other professionals of all backgrounds and political affiliations to present their ideas. The DPU makes a point, however, to never endorse its speakers. We will be taking live questions during the latter half of this event, so if you have a question for any of the panelists today, please type it into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will select questions that receive the greatest number of upvotes, so be sure to upvote your favorite questions. If you are not comfortable asking your question live to the panel, please submit your question anonymously. Otherwise, we will give you the ability to unmute yourself and ask your question directly to the panelists. I would now like to welcome our fantastic panelists for this event and begin our discussion about climate and energy in New Hampshire and the United States. First, I'm very pleased to introduce Mr. Rob Werner. Mr. Werner is the New Hampshire State Director for the League of Conservation Voters. Having organized numerous successful advocacy and legislative campaigns for the American Heart Association, Smoke-Free New Hampshire Alliance, and the American Cancer Society, Rob has extensive experience in both environmental and health issues. He served previously as the National Field Director of Americans for Campaign Reform and currently sits on the Concord City Council. Next, I would like to welcome State Senator Suzanne Prentis. Senator Prentis was elected to represent State Senate District 5, covering Hanover, Lebanon, Claremont, Plainfield, and more. She currently serves on the Senate Education and Executive Departments and Administration Committees. She also served 2 terms as mayor of Lebanon. Finally, Senator Prentis has held leadership positions in healthcare and public safety at the national, state, regional, and local levels. Our final panelist is Ms. Tracy Hutchins, the president of the Upper Valley Business Alliance. Ms. Hutchins has also served as president of the Hanover Area Chamber of Commerce and manager of the Merrimack County Conservation District, among other roles. From 1996 to 2004, she was the owner of Ecotex, an environmental consulting firm that provided project management and nonprofit administration for conservation and environmental focused nonprofits. We are honored to have Ms. Hutchins, Senator Prentis, and Mr. Werner join us as panelists today. Finally, I would like to introduce the moderator for today's event, Professor Elizabeth Wilson. In addition to being my own amazing professor, Professor Wilson is the inaugural director of the Irving Institute for Energy and Society at Dartmouth. Her work focuses on the implementation of energy and environmental policies and laws in practice, and the interplays between technology innovation, policy creation, and institutional design in making the realms of energy, decision-making in the realms of energy and the environment. Now, I've talked for long enough, so I'm going to turn it over to our panelists to introduce themselves and discuss their role in New Hampshire and national conversation about climate and energy. So first up is Mr. Rob Werner.
Thanks so much, Will. Very glad to be here and very glad to be here with Professor Wilson and our distinguished speakers. I'm going to share my screen and here we go. Okay, can everybody see that? Very good. So I'm going to be talking about let me start up here. Let me start here. I'm going to be talking about the updating folks on historic actions already taken by the Biden-Harris administration and provide a look ahead to future action we expect. So during the 2020 campaign, Vice President Biden and Senator Harris really campaigned on climate change. And you know, this had not really been done to the extent that this team did this before in terms of really injecting this issue of climate change into the campaign with very specific proposals. And in public opinion polling, unlike in previous election cycles, this issue really did rise much more to the top of the concerns of the voters. And the top line takeaway from the campaign and going into the administration is really that this administration, and they did as a campaign, talked about an all-of-government response to the climate crisis. One of the 4 crises that he campaigned on, addressing the pandemic, economic inequality, racial inequality, and climate change. And they're all really intertwined, as you well know. A few highlights during the campaign: $2 trillion plan with 40% of those benefits going to environmental justice communities, 100% clean energy, electricity rather, by 2035, 0 emissions new buildings by 2030, committed to transportation electrification and transitioning all school buses to electric, and expanding transit, massive investment building retrofits and sustainable housing to make them safer and more efficient. Make public lands and ocean part of the solution. There's a program called 30 by 30, an effort to preserve 30% of our land and oceans by 2030. And commitments to eliminating legacy pollution, strong enforcement against polluters through EPA and DOJ, robust engagement with environmental justice communities, modernizing and strengthening the 1994 environmental order on environmental justice. So their plan was really part of their closing argument. It's very popular and was hugely important to delivering this winning coalition. It's central to the economic agenda. I think you've all heard about the Build Back Better plan and approach. We have what we were calling the Climate Dream Team. The administration has done a tremendous job in terms of bringing forward very ambitious and experienced folks all across government. We have the Climate Cabinet with the EPA, Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, Jennifer Granholm just confirmed last week, Pete Buttigieg in Transportation, Gina McCarthy, Ali Zaidi, Brenda Mallory, all in the White House. They will be coordinating economic and environmental policy together with the economic team. And really, economic policy is climate policy with Brian Deese and Cecilia Rouse, Jared Bernstein, Wally Adamo, others. And then we've got the international aspect in terms of the Secretary of State, Antony Blinken. We've got John Kerry reprising his role in terms of international climate negotiations that he had as Secretary of State as our envoy. And really, this whole team is tied together and really does represent the whole of government approach. Day one actions that the president took: rejoining the Paris Climate Agreement. And I think you might know that last Friday was actually the technical and official day that we rejoined the Paris Climate Agreement, undoing environmental and health rollbacks that the Trump administration had put into effect over the past 4 years, stopping the Keystone XL pipeline, halting drilling in the Arctic refuge. This is a redressing of a lot of these things. I mean, I think that it's fair to say that the previous administration took a vacation on these issues in the last 4 years. And now, we are re-entering a lot of work on all of these things. At the end of January, there was the first Climate Day at the White House where President Biden signed into law many executive orders, creating a national climate task force led by Gina McCarthy, centering environmental justice, government leading by example, making the point that conservation is climate policy, fossil fuel leasing pause in terms of federal lands, highlighting that a just transition and good jobs is a very important part of this climate agenda, and centering science, which is so important. Looking ahead, we're debating the package, the COVID relief package right now, passed the House last week. Now it's in the hands of the Senate. After this has gotten through the process, which we're confident that it will by mid-March, you're going to see a new package come forward, which is really going to be focused on this Build Back Better plan, massive economic recovery legislation. Again, 40% of investments in environmental justice communities, building healthy communities and reducing pollution, investments to advance clean energy and electrified transportation, retrofit buildings, build clean water infrastructure. There's such a need with water infrastructure in the country. Invest in natural climate solutions in terms of the agriculture sector and regenerative agriculture. Regulatory action, limit carbon and toxic pollutions from cars, power plants, methane. Earth Day World Leader Summit. That'll be coming up on April 22nd. And we need to get ready for the international climate negotiations that will be held in Glasgow, Scotland in COP26 in November of this year. So really, personnel is policy. So I think that putting forward this incredible team will have a big impact. And again, coordinating actions across all our government. And don't forget that government buys a lot of things. The procurement policy of government and the procurement leverage of government, the billions upon billions of dollars that are spent by government on goods and services. This is a real opportunity to take advantage of that purchasing power and to lead by example to make sure that purchasing is done in a sustainable and green fashion. So we can talk more about these issues and many others during the Q&A, but I'd like to turn it back over to Will. Thank you.
All right. So next, I would like to welcome State Senator Suzanne Prentis to talk a little bit about herself and what her role is on energy in the environment in New Hampshire. So Senator Prentis, can you, you have the floor.
Great, thank you, Will, and good to see you again, Rob. And I'd like to welcome the Dartmouth Political Union for the opportunity to come and speak to my hometown, home district folks about the work that we're doing. And I want to start, when Will has introduced me, one of the things that in my background you didn't hear is a lot of, say, expertise and work in the area of the environment. I've spooled up on that because I'm in the local arena mostly, but what it tells you all, I mean, I'm a paramedic by trade. What it tells you all is that, whether you're a paramedic or you're an apple farmer or you're a real estate agent, everybody has an interest in the fight against climate change and a role in being a good steward in our environment. And that's how I got involved. In fact, Rob Werner is one of the people that, and my fellow city councilor, Cliff Bilo, who's a Dartmouth grad, have really been great mentors and educators for me. So let's talk both. I'm a new state senator, but most of my experience and work on the environment and energy, clean energy, and the fight against climate change has really been grounded at the local level. And I think that's one of the most important things for folks to take away from this in New Hampshire is that one thing the legislature has done very well is unleashed what I call the power of local government. So working as a city councilor, and then even when I was a mayor, when former President Trump stepped out of the Paris Climate Accord, communities like Lebanon and Concord and Nashua and others, we signed up and signed in because, again, our local role is important. Here in the city of Lebanon, and this is enabled by our work at the state legislature, we adopted a tax exemption so that if you have property, whether it's a home or a business, you have what they call real property, and you put a solar array on that you are not assessed for the value of that. You have an exemption, a tax exemption, so you're not assessed on the value of that, which actually promotes more people bringing solar to their homes. Now we know we need to change, we need to change the net meter, we need to lift the net metering cap and do other work in that area, but that's something local government can do. In local government, we've been working on a methane gas reclamation project at the dump. So to take that, the emissions there and turn them into energy. And we've had some peaks and valleys with that. I'm sad to say it's still not online, but we're closer than we've ever been. We're moving to electric vehicles. at the city council level, I'm proud to say that when I was the mayor, we went from having stacks of paper in the room and stacks of paper as councilors to going to a paperless system. And within city government, everything is done with DocuSign now. So taking those simple actions right down to at the council table, which none of us are at anymore in our homes, we use mugs instead of plastic glasses because we joined on with a community group that wanted to eliminate plastic in our community. So my point to you here is that there's so much that can be done at the local level that you need to take stock in that and be part of it. That's where I cut my teeth and then was able to take this type of voice up to the Senate. So as I moved to the Senate, one of the things, the big thing clear to me is number one, I wanted to preserve the authority of the locals to do the kind of work they were doing here in Lebanon. Number two, one of the bills that I filed, it's a companion bill to House Bill 172, is Senate Bill 115. This has been really important to me, is to have a climate action plan that's actually in statute and greenhouse gas emission goals that are actually in statute that bring us to net zero by 2050. A transition to green jobs, working and integrating the goals that are in Senate Bill 115 and House Bill 172 into all of the work in government when it involves emissions planning and around energy. We actually have to have a comprehensive package and be working together. Our last climate action plan was published it was worked on between 2007 and 2009, updating that, putting it in statute, publishing those goals, and holding folks accountable with an inventory that's published annually starting in 2022 is where we want to be as a state. So that has actually, it's still in committee, but I'm optimistic. Especially we've been able to get the support of the Business Industry Alliance, the BIA, by putting we're proposing an amendment to put language in for a cost impact study, and they promised us that if we put that language in, that they'll support this bill. So that's really that's a big step and really important. So I think do I have a few more minutes, or should I see Tracy on the screen, which I think is my cue. But I guess if I do want us to say anything to wrap, number one, I cut my teeth on this locally as a member of my community, as a city councilor. What you do in your home communities matters. Your state needs to empower you to do that and needs to take a bold stand in encompassing overarching legislation like they did in the state of Maine. And I think it's important to remember all these steps add up. We are still behind in New Hampshire in terms of regionally. We're behind on solar. We're behind on wind. In our regional portfolio standard, we could do much better, and we know that. So I'll take my break there and turn it back over to Will. Hey, Tracy.
Thank you, Senator Prentis, such an important point. So our final panelist is Ms. Tracy Hutchins, the president of the Upper Valley Business Alliance, here to talk to us about the role of business in the fight against climate change. So thank you, Ms. Hutchins, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this. I feel lucky to follow Senator Prentis because what I'm spotlighting is really a very hyper-local in terms of the businesses here in the Upper Valley, and certainly the communities, and Hanover and Lebanon have both been leaders in this, I would say, for the state, and part of that is due to Senator Prentis's work here in Lebanon. Both of these communities have taken stances where they were one of the first to vote and to say that they would be sustainable. Hanover was the first municipality in New Hampshire to make a commitment to sustainability by a vote at town meeting. Lebanon has taken great steps in terms of sustainability, and following that are a lot of our businesses as well. So there's a number of businesses here in the Upper Valley that have made commitments to lowering their carbon emissions, to sustainability, and that's quite a change from even 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I think there was a dichotomy where business was thought to only be focused on the bottom line. And indeed, it was really difficult, I think, for a business that wanted to be more environmentally aware to actually put that into action, because sometimes the technology was so expensive that it was out of reach for particularly a small business. So it was left more to the larger businesses if they could implement it. But here in the Upper Valley, we have Hypotherm, huge business with 1,500 employees locally that has made a plan to lower their carbon emissions and to have zero waste. Dartmouth Hitchcock too has plans in place to work on keeping their carbon emissions lowered. And then we have very small businesses. One of my members is Nordic Waste, and they started composting and are helping residents here in the Upper Valley by picking up their food waste and making that available for composting. So even if you live in an apartment and you can't compost in your backyard, you can still participate. So there's quite a few businesses that are now doing that, and with the new technologies, there's more opportunities for them to participate and to not have it be so difficult and expensive. We've had a lot of good work locally and throughout the state with the New Hampshire Saves program. That's something that was actually put together by the energy producers. So that might seem a little counterproductive, but what has come out of it is there have been rebates and help for a number of businesses to change over to LED lighting, to looking at how their heating systems, how the efficiency of those, and how that they can lower their energy impact. So there's quite a bit going on. Like Senator Prentis said, we have a lot of catching up to do here in New Hampshire. I don't think we've always been on board with energy policy, but we're working on it.
All right, thank you so much, Ms. Hutchins. I believe we are now going to get into my favorite section of these events, which is where we introduce Professor Elizabeth Wilson to lead our guided discussion panel. Professor Wilson, handing over the floor to you. Oh, and don't forget to unmute yourself.
This is a really important topic and incredibly timely right now. Rob, you gave us the federal overlay, Senator Prentis, kind of the efforts at the state, and then thinking about local businesses, Tracy really kind of zoned in on this area. So we have 3 different levels here. But what I'd really like to ask you, how does your job interact with climate change in the environment, and how have you made a difference? A lot of students on here are really interested in that activism angle and where you see that. And I think you addressed that in each of your remarks. But I'm also curious in terms of how you've all worked with one another, because I think oftentimes from the outside, people don't appreciate how tight these networks are that really make things happen on the ground. So let's start with Senator Prentis.
Sure. Thanks so much, Professor Wilson. So I've actually worked, again, going back to, I think it's 2016, worked with Rob Werner and then Tracy since she's been here in the Upper Valley. And they've been a mix. Obviously, Tracy is more local, regional, and Rob has been local as a Concord City Councilor, Lebanon City Councilor, and then, statewide. Rob is actually somebody that I consider a go-to for, as a resource. As I said earlier, I'm a paramedic, but I have great interest in this because other city councilors, and I saw how interested my community was, and then from a Senate perspective, this district. So I have to reach out to the people who actually know this best to get my advice when a certain type of bill comes up or an ordinance that we're considering locally. And I talk to people like Rob. I talk to people like one of your alumni, Clifton Belo. He's a former state senator. And I might even, talk to Tracy or some of the businesses to see how that would impact them. So that's how we all intersect. For me, it's heavily in a resource and an expertise manner. And I'm so glad to have them. And, like Rob brought me on board with the Paris Climate Accord, like right away, I had a friend, and I've been happy. I've been pleased to call Rob my friend since then.
Fantastic. Rob, she talked about you last, so let's go to Tracy and then we'll finish up with you.
Well, one of the great things about being in New Hampshire is it's a small state. So there is a lot of overlap with people who know each other from different sectors of their lives. I just had an opportunity to meet Rob, but one of the things that our organization, the Upper Valley Business Alliance, does is we act as advocates on behalf of our members. And so Rob and I, when we talked about this presentation, we had a nice discussion about some bills that we're watching go through the House, and I had some questions for him, and you know, and he's, since he is somebody that can lobby our different lawmakers, you know, I can relay that information to him, what our businesses are thinking or what we may need. Same with Senator Prentis. We've worked together, both here as her as a city councilor, and then again, you know, I may reach out to her and say we have some concerns about different bills that are moving through the Senate, and ask the senator to look into them and, you know, make sure that our business interests are represented.
And then Rob.
Sure, thanks. So yeah, I am a lobbyist at the State House in Concord, and the League of Conservation Voters, for those of you who don't really know us, we are a national organization that's been around for about 50 years now. And we have a very robust team here on the ground. We do a lot of policy work at the State House. We work very closely with our congressional delegation. We work across the state with many, many different communities. I think, and our team thinks, that it's very important to engage with the business community because, you know, climate policy really is business policy. Clean energy policy is business policy, because in order for us to move to a clean energy economy, it will have the benefits not only of protecting our environment, but creating economic opportunity and jobs. And that's essential to this transition, and it's essential to bringing society along with us for this very needed change in the way that we derive our energy. So I work closely with Senator Prentis and her colleagues, and another hat that I wear is I sit on the Government Affairs Committee of the Greater Concord Chamber of Commerce, so I'm sensitive to those issues. And again, I think it's very important to involve the business community in this climate and clean energy discussion.
No, that's absolutely fabulous. And my next question was actually about the federal area, but Rob, I think you did such a great job of highlighting where the Biden administration is going and all of the different initiatives and the different people involved. Although when I look at that cast of thousands, I just see coordination being a huge issue that's going to be a challenge here. But I'd like to bring it back to New Hampshire. New Hampshire's lagged behind other states in many of its environmental movements. Why do you think that is? Where do you see it going under this legislative session? And where do you see some of the opportunities and also some of the challenges? And Rob, you went last, so let's start with you.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been a hard road over the last number of years in terms of New Hampshire and the rest of the region. And it's been a little frustrating looking at all the states around us making very tremendous progress on these important issues. Most recently, Maine, which was somewhat stuck politically in terms of what they wanted to do, what many people wanted to do. They've made tremendous progress in a short time because of new political leadership. And that's really essential. One of the things that we feel strongly about at LCB is that while we spend a lot of time in terms of lobbying and policy development and so forth, it's really important that elected officials at the local, state, and federal levels share our priorities and share our values. So, you know, New Hampshire has certainly a libertarian streak to it. This past election session has not been kind to many of the priorities that we want to pursue. I think we're in a defensive mode in a number of areas. Renewable portfolio standard probably being one that rises to the top where, our goals are already very small to begin with compared to other states, and we need to defend against more erosion. I think the one thing that we can accomplish this session is progress on net metering. We've been trying to raise the net metering cap to 5 megawatts from the current 1 megawatt limit for a number of sessions now. We've come close. But this year there's legislation that would allow municipalities and school districts, at least for a start, to net meter projects. And that has a practical effect. In Concord, for example, if that policy was in place, we could put a 5 megawatt system on our cap landfill. Would be a big benefit. And other communities around the state are really in the same boat. So I hope that we can continue to make the case that energy efficiency, making these investments are necessary to reducing our energy usage, reducing our consumption, reducing our load, which in the end is really going to help everyone in terms of cost over the long term of our energy systems.
I really appreciate that. I'd also like to invite the audience, please type your questions into the Q&A. In about 7 minutes, we're going to go to those. And right now there's only 4. There's 73 of you online. Get typing, people. Tracy, I've appreciated, as part of the story of what's happening locally, that businesses respond to incentives and clear signals for action. How do you see this legislative session affecting or not affecting businesses in the Upper Valley as they're trying to incorporate their different issues in their business plans?
Yeah, it's for businesses, I think they kind of fall into a couple of groups. One is, those who hold environmental ideals close to their heart, and so they want to be more sustainable just because they feel it's the right thing to do. And then there's other businesses that would rather, they need to be incentivized to do it. And now that we're starting to see that with some of these technologies, they can save money and it's not out of reach, and their return on an upfront investment, say to put solar panels on their building or to change their lighting or whatever it may be, that return of when they're going to see the investment come back to them is getting shorter versus, it could be years. Years ago, it was years before they would receive that. The session right now, I think we have we have a very bipartisan legislature right now, with some deep divides between the Republicans and the Democrats at the state level, unfortunately.
That's a really nice way to put it. We'll hear more from Senator Prentis on that one.
Yeah, I'm sure the senator can say more about that, but it's very apparent. So, there's a few things that we're concerned about. One I had actually talked with Rob about, which was there's a proposal to do away with the interest and dividends tax, which is also used for R&D credits for businesses. And there's quite a few businesses in the Upper Valley that do R&D work. And if they don't have that credit, they may not be able to continue with that. So, there's different bills like that we're watching that we hope will make it through. And we just have to wait and see how that goes.
No, I wanted you guys to tee this up for Senator Prentis, and I think you did a great job. Thank you. And thanks to the audience for the questions. We're up to 10. If we can get up to 20 in the next 5 minutes, I'll give you a prize. Senator Prentis, you're the one with boots on the ground here. You're the one being locked into legislative sessions, literally. Could you please talk a little bit as how you see these issues playing out in this next session going forward?
Thank you. I want to say I feel like I'm back in college here a little bit, getting the direction, like get on there and write your questions. It takes me back to those days. I appreciate it. So thank you, Professor Wilson. As we're playing a lot of defense now, as a senator, I'm one of 24, and we are all remote. versus the House, which is, 435 members. Rob, correct me if I'm wrong. It's 435, my number. It's big, and it's kind of unwieldy. And we are very we're very partisan at the surface. So the governor's office, the executive council, the state senate, and the House of Representatives. Look at that and say, can the minority get anything done? And I think I know the answer to that is yes. I can tell you from a Senate side, 24 people is an easy number to work with, and that we have already, my experience as the new kid on the block, have I felt some of the pain of minority line of, being on the minority? Sure, certainly have. Like right to work would be a perfect example of that. But on the environmental side, I brought up an energy earlier, Senate Bill 115. It's the same as House Bill 172. And we knew that House Bill 172 was going to have a harder time because of the makeup, the construct of the House is even within the Republican Party split. So I introduced the same exact language to give it another vehicle. And on the Senate side, we actually have, I had the Senate Majority Leader sign on to the bill. And we were able again to work with a lobbying group that is normally against this to bring them on board. We've got them on record on being on board as long as we make this amendment. So it's not easy. It's not easy to be the underdog, but it doesn't mean that it's completely over. We have to look for the opportunities where we can collaborate for good.
No, that's absolutely fantastic. And we've got some great questions coming in. Thank you, everybody, for this. One of the questions actually, I'm going to start with Rob and then go to Senator Prentis. This is from Wiley Little. Are there certain environmental policies that seem to garner bipartisan support the state government would be better off pushing forward more strongly during this session? If you're saying there's resistance to energy policy, water infrastructure improvements or others or adaptation issues with flooding and climate change. But are there any, and let's start with Rob, that you really see as a little bit more in their nature bipartisan where you may be able to get a bit more traction?
Well, I think water is so basic. People really get that from a public health point of view. So, as a nation, we have really fallen behind in terms of investments around our water infrastructure. So that's a real area where there's a lot of consensus. I mean, look at the sort of PFAS, PFOA issues in towns like Merrimack and on the Seacoast. That has a lot of public support. And there's been a very strong bipartisan response to try to address that. And New Hampshire actually has put forward pretty stringent regulations on that recently. They are in court at the moment, but there's a lot of bipartisan consensus around that. I do think that this whole aspect of net metering can get through in this way that we've talked about. It's traditionally, over the last number of years, been very bipartisan. The Senate passed the net metering bill for everyone, not just municipalities and school districts, 24-0. But for various other reasons, it ended up to be vetoed by Governor Sununu and fell only 6 votes short in the House via override. But there's a lot of consensus around that in terms of what can communities do to control their own energy costs and to have homegrown energy in their communities that's going to help with the electric bill of the municipality and eventually, hopefully, many residents. So regardless of some of the back and forth and the details about that, I think there is a large group of both Democrats, Republicans, and independents who think that making those investments around clean energy is really worth it and has an economic impact. Lastly, I would say that anything that you connect to public health improvements around climate and energy has a great deal of resonance amongst the population, very strong. So people get that they understand that pollution and carbon is part of a pollution issue, that public health is very much affected by climate change, and people are making that connection. And I think policymakers are increasingly paying attention to that. I'm
saving the COVID question for later, but we'll get there too. But Senator Prentis, I'd like to ask you kind of where you see bipartisan potential. And then afterwards, Tracy, to you to kind of see if they've missed anything that you think the business community would be interested in. So Senator Prentis.
So I thank you, and I think Rob hit a home run, and I want to zero in on net metering. It's, we did see last session this, hit out of the ballpark on this, at 24-0 and lose its place at the governor's desk. And as Rob said, it was for everybody. So this year we had to look at the schools, and the municipal side versus, I put in a bill to try to carry that bill forward again to, keep it alive and give it another chance and change some of the language to address the governor's concerns. That won't go. But the bill that Rob talked about before, there is, it's been my experience before I was in the legislature that there's strong bipartisan support for net metering. We just have this one place where we got hooked up last year. So we're going to try a different way in. And sometimes that's the way to prove your value and move further. And I think actually we've already proved our value or we wouldn't even be this far in the conversation. I want to add one other piece in that I think has some traction in a bipartisan way, and that has to deal with, providing incentives for not just businesses and but municipalities and not-for-profits to bring, renewable energy, bring solar into their, into their properties. Right now we have, I introduced a bill, actually Cliff Bila worked on this with me, so that we have an area of Lebanon that is a not-for-profit mobile home park, and they have this big shared solar array, but they don't get the same type of tax exemption that I would get if I had one on my house. We want to incentivize that, and that I was able to pick up some bipartisan support on seeing that move forward. So we don't have a hearing for it yet, but I think that those types of, it feels piecemeal at times, but if that's what we need to get there, then that's what we need to get there.
No, I really appreciated that last point. There's a huge energy justice or energy equity angle in this. Some of the studies that have been done in Michigan found that something like 89% of the, don't quote me on the number, of energy efficiency has been spent by, white, wealthy homeowners. And so not only having the policies, but understanding implementation, how they're actually being used is absolutely critical if we're going to be thinking about these issues. And I'm happy to share this paper with you. Tracy, they've mentioned a bunch of different ideas from a business community perspective. Is there anything that now that you have the ears of the head lobbyist and the senator here that you would also want to add to that Christmas list?
Well, I would just follow up and say that, I think, like I had said before, there was always this dichotomy that what was good for business wasn't necessarily good for the environment. And I think that attitude has changed quite a bit. Businesses would like to have a lot more options themselves for having clean energy. And, New Hampshire has some of the highest energy costs in the country. We're kind of, New England does, we're tucked up into this corner. And so it's difficult to get good energy and affordable energy. And we have a lot of businesses that use a lot of energy in their production. And so any way that they can augment themselves with solar or something that's clean, they would be all for it. It just has to be sustainable for them and not so cost prohibitive to implement.
No, that's really great. And actually a question that was on here, I'm going to combine two of the questions. One from Catherine Koning. Can you comment on the efforts to start community power aggregation in various towns and cities of New Hampshire? Do you think HB 315, which will hamstring community power efforts, will ultimately pass? And then the other one on this is by Robert Drysdale, Senator Prentis, who also talked about the importance of local governments, but there are limits on net metering and there are bills in Concord which will reduce local autonomy. Can you discuss these? So let's start with Senator Prentis, and then we'll see if some others would like to weigh in too.
Sure. House Bill 315 would, in the words of one of my constituents from Claremont, would gut, community power. It's seen, and I defer to Rob what his feeling is on the, the conversations on the House side, what I've seen, there's been a lot of interaction, a lot of testimony, and that it is due to be exec, so voted on in committee on the 8th. So that's coming up. But I'd like to think that would go away. But I know in the committee that it's heard in is suffering from some very partisan hiccups. And I'm not sure what the future of that is. So I'm actually going to turn to Rob. I've just been following, as it moves through and responding to my constituents. Of course, in Lebanon, we're really interested because we're really engaged as a city in community power and municipal aggregation.
Yeah, thanks, Senator Prentis. So, the community power movement really is about ever more distributed energy and bulk purchasing in a way. It's interesting to me that some folks who are wanting to pass House Bill 315 are actually doing things that are monopolistic and really undercuts competition. And that's fascinating to me from a political and philosophical point of view, because many times on the part of the GOP DNA is competition, more competition, and so that's interesting.
When it doesn't hurt their business, Rob. Come on.
The House ST&E committee is it is quite a difficult committee this session. But I think many of us, regardless of what happens in the House, are going to be counting on the Senate to take a fresh look at this issue. And I think that, our hope is that cooler heads will prevail in the Senate if indeed House Bill 315 makes it through the House. It's got certainly a lot of opposition. And somebody like Cliff Below, I think, does a really great job of trying to figure out how to talk to people as to, you don't want to pass this bill. We're trying to do something innovative, and this is anti-innovation.
Mm-hmm. Tracy, do you have anything to add?
Actually, good for your community.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, that bill speaks directly to the fact that sometimes things just get entrenched in New Hampshire, and there can be a resistance to doing things a different way or a new way. And that particular bill has some support from some very, large companies in New Hampshire and power producers that have traditionally worked very closely with the state. So it's going to be a difficult row, I think, for that particular bill.
No, thank you very much. I'm going to combine two questions here. One is from Ed Kern. In New Hampshire, what is the greatest source of CO2 emissions? Why does New Hampshire have the only active coal-fired power plant in New England? And here's an add-on with Elizabeth Shoemaker. I was just reading about a strike that would ask participants not to pay their electric bill to put pressure to close down the Bow coal burning plant. Does this make any sense? As a senior citizen, I'm a bit risk adverse. Is there a better way to close down the Bow station? Coal in New England. This is it. Let's go with Rob.
Thanks. Yes, the Bow Power Plant is still with us, and it was just actually going to be with us for a little while. And the reason is because of the need for that plant to kick in peak demand times, whether it's when it's very, very cold or very, very hot and the air conditioners are going like crazy.
Wait, you're using coal as your peaker? Come on, guys.
Well, I'm just saying it doesn't run very often. I think part of the problem is that we need more renewable energy to be developed to actually shave the peak demand. And, over the last year, we've demonstrated that more solar can actually do that. But if we can get to a position where we have enough renewable energy, solar and offshore wind, that's going to shave that demand and eventually replace it, that plant is not long for its life. As I said, it doesn't run very often as it is. I wish it was not there, But we need more distributed energy across the grid to be able to take that peak demand so that we don't need that plant.
So I've got about 3 more minutes, and then I was going to give each of you kind of a minute and a half. I'm a little stricter than the other host to give your big thoughts and wrap up. But I wanted to end with a couple of the questions that really kind of ground us in now. And one was from an anonymous attendee: how has the pandemic limited efforts for conservation / eco-friendly policies? And another linked onto that was, if you saw from Bart Guetti, how did the power system failures in Texas affect the passage of efficiency bills in New Hampshire? Just again, these issues of high salience that are really kind of forefront in our thinking, how are those addressing it? And then to all of you, there are several questions about how people could be involved more. How can individuals get involved to take action? Where should they be looking? And that's, and then we'll finish with these questions, and then I'll give you your 1.5 minutes each, and then we'll be done. But thank you so much, all of you, for just a lovely conversation. And let's start this one with Tracy.
Sorry, could you say the question again?
So the question was about how the pandemic has limited efforts for conservation, eco-friendly policies. And if you think the recent events in Texas with all of the outages are making some of those energy reliability issues a bit more salient.
Yes, definitely. It's, you know, when I was watching that happening in Texas, I was a little bit in awe, because think about how much energy use in the middle of their summer when it's 110 degrees there, and then they have this cold snap. So it was a little baffling as to why they had such issues. But how the pandemic has changed things, I mean, I think it's just made it harder for all of us to continue doing business, and you know, not being able to meet in person and have those interactions. So yeah, I mean, it's made everything a little bit more difficult. I think we're starting to figure out how to work with it now after it's been about a year, and we're working that out. But yeah, it's just made things more difficult. That's all.
Yeah, thank you. And Senator Prentis?
Sure. Thank you. Anything that says reusable, any of the reusable policies and practices that, you know, right down to families had taken on, came into question, and some of them were even banned during the early days of COVID. We're starting to see some of that turn around. So I remember right before COVID started, a number of communities in New Hampshire had moved away from plastic bags at the supermarket, and they wanted you to come in with your own, you know, if you showed up at the co-op without your, you know, reusable bags or you know, your home bags, or down at, I'm pointing to Hannaford, you know, it's like, oh no, I've got to get my bags. Banned. They didn't, you know, anything that had to do with reusable is where we saw some, you know, steps back that were impacted. We also, with the amount of time that we had to, and products put into cleaning, including using, you know, paper and cleaners for sanitizing surfaces, we saw, I think, more of a generation of trash. These are just simple things that I observed almost every day. And then I also noticed using air dryers had moved away, energy efficient hand dryers in bathrooms. We went back again to paper there. So reusable.
So really that
and
waste
then local
issue with the COVID piece. Yeah, I'm going to move on to Rob, and then I'm going to come back to you for your 1 minute.
All right.
Rob.
Right.
No.
Thanks. Well, it's interesting because over the last year, we've seen emissions drop across the globe. And I think we've all seen, you know, the fish swimming in the Venice Canal, and we can see that, and all sorts of different things that have happened around the globe. Really, transportation, you know, who's flying around the globe these days? Not too many people. Had a big effect. But don't be lulled. So, you know, what I'm afraid of is that folks are going to say, oh, great, you know, we have this big reduction in emissions. But do not be fooled. There's going to be a tremendous bang of economic activity, of travel towards the end of this year, and certainly into 2022. as we move ever strongly out of this situation that we've been in. But it does present an opportunity, and maybe for folks to rethink a little bit about how they do things. And maybe we don't need all that building space. Maybe we don't travel as much as we used to.
No,
so
this is great. I just want to make sure we've got 3 minutes left. I want to make sure you each get your 1 minute.
On Texas.
Okay, this is your 1 minute. Go.
Okay.
Professor.
All right.
Really, we end. So yeah.
All right.
Okay,
So
please, Rob.
League of Conservation, if you're interested in being involved in League of Conservation Voters, you can contact us. You can contact me, Rob, at _Werner at lcv.org. You can look at our website at lcv.org, and we can be back in touch with you. Thank you for being part of it, and you all are part of the solution.
Wonderful last thoughts. Thank you. Tracy, you.
I would say if you want to be involved, contact your local state reps. They need to hear from their constituents. And when they do hear from their constituents, they vote accordingly. So I would urge everyone, if you really want to get involved, is to know who your state reps are and let them know what your thoughts are on different issues.
Thank you. Senator Prentis, last word, your big thoughts for how we should think about these issues going forward.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed working with you, Professor Wilson, today. Here's my big thought, is that this all happens on the local level. So you asked how people can get involved. You have Sustainable Hanover, you have Sustainable Lebanon, you have the Lebanon Energy Advisory Committee. You have these committees in every town and city in the state. And if you don't, go ahead and get one started with somebody that you know. It all starts locally.
Will, I wrapped you up right on time. These guys are great. Thank you, everybody, for a super panel. Will, over to you.
Yeah, thank you all so much for coming. Unfortunately, that is all the time we have for today. I would like to thank each and every one of our panelists once more for joining us this afternoon. I also want to thank Professor Elizabeth Wilson for moderating this event today, as well as Catherine Dara and Darshana Griggs for their amazing help running the webinar. Finally, I want to thank all of you for attending this event. If you're interested in learning more about the DPU, you can check us out on our website, which is sites.dartmouth.edu/DPU, or on our Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram pages. Our handle is @TheDPUnion. So thank you all once again, and have a great evening.
Thanks, Will. This was really super. Take care, everybody. Thank you.